Unearthing the Lost Ark, the shocking truth of its power. The Bible records an object so dangerous that touching it could kill you instantly, even if you were chosen by God. For centuries, the Ark of the Covenant stood at the very center of Israel's religious life. It was not simply a golden box containing tablets of stone. It was the throne of the invisible God, the meeting point between heaven and earth, the place where divine holiness descended with such intensity that to approach it incorrectly meant instant death. Its power toppled fortress walls, struck down the irreverent, and turned the course of rivers. And then, without warning or explanation, it vanished from history. No archaeological expedition has recovered it. No ancient text definitively records its fate. What remains is a void in the historical record so profound that it has spawned theories ranging from hidden chambers beneath Jerusalem to sacred caves in Ethiopia, from divine concealment to deliberate destruction. The Ark's disappearance is one of the most enduring mysteries in biblical archaeology, but its documented power, while it existed, is beyond dispute within the scriptural narrative. This is not ancient mythology embellished over time. The biblical accounts describe specific incidents, name witnesses, record consequences, and detail ritual protocols with a precision that suggests eyewitness transmission. Whether one approaches these texts as sacred scripture or as ancient historical documents, the consistency and specificity of the accounts demand serious engagement. The Ark matters because it represents something fundamental about the nature of divine presence. In a world where gods were thought to inhabit statues and reside in temples made by human hands, the God of Israel refused all attempts at physical representation. Yet, paradoxically, this same God commanded the construction of a physical object that would serve as the focal point of his presence among his people. The Ark was not God, but it was the place where God chose to manifest his glory in a way that finite human beings could encounter without being consumed. Understanding the Ark is essential to understanding how ancient Israel conceived of holiness, covenant, and the possibility of relationship between the infinite and the finite. But the Ark was also dangerous, catastrophically so. The biblical text makes this abundantly clear through repeated warnings, elaborate protocols, and recorded fatalities. This was not an object that could be treated casually or handled according to human preference. The terror surrounding the Ark was not superstition. It was recognized as a necessary response to the reality of what the Ark represented, the unmediated presence of absolute holiness in contact with human imperfection. The story begins not with the Ark itself, but with a covenant. At Mount Sinai, after the Exodus from Egypt, God entered into a formal treaty relationship with the nation of Israel. The terms were inscribed on 2 stone tablets, the 10 Commandments, which would become the primary contents of the Ark. But before the tablets, before the covenant ceremony, God gave Moses detailed architectural instructions for a portable sanctuary that would travel with the people through the wilderness. At the heart of this sanctuary would be the Ark. The instructions in Exodus chapter 25 are remarkably specific. The Ark was to be constructed from acacia wood, a dense, durable hardwood native to the Sinai region, resistant to decay and insect damage. Practical considerations for an object that would spend 40 years moving through desert conditions. The wooden chest measured 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high, approximately 45 inches by 27 inches by 27 inches. Scholars note this was large enough to hold the stone tablets while remaining portable by 4 men, using carrying poles, but the wood was never meant to be visible. The entire structure was overlaid with pure gold, inside and out, creating a surface that would reflect light with stunning brilliance in the dim interior of the tabernacle. Gold in ancient Near Eastern cultures symbolized divinity, incorruptibility, and permanence. The dual layer, gold over wood, has been interpreted by theologians as representing divine glory, encompassing earthly material, the heavenly plainly clothing the terrestrial. A gold molding ran around the top edge, and 4 gold rings were cast and attached to the 4 lower corners. Through these rings passed 2 poles of acacia wood, also overlaid with gold. The poles were never to be removed, even when the ark was stationary. This permanent installation served a crucial function. It meant the ark itself could be transported without human hands ever touching the sacred object directly. The consequences of violating this principle would later be demonstrated with lethal clarity. The lid of the ark was not merely a cover. It was called the kapparet in Hebrew, traditionally translated as mercy seat or atonement cover. This was a solid gold plate from which 2 cherub, angelic figures, were hammered out of the same piece of gold, facing each other with wings spread upward and inward, creating a space between them. This space above the mercy seat, overshadowed by cherubic wings, was designated as the specific location where God would meet with Moses and speak with him. The book of Exodus states explicitly, "There I will meet with you, and from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim that are on the ark of the testimony, I will speak with you." The cherubim deserve closer attention. These were not the chubby winged infants of Renaissance art. In ancient Near Eastern iconography, which would have formed the visual vocabulary for the Israelite craftsmen, cherubim were powerful guardian beings, often depicted with multiple wings and faces, combining human, leonine, and avian features. They represented the threshold between the earthly and divine realms. In Genesis, cherubim guard the way to the tree of life after humanity's expulsion from Eden. In Ezekiel's vision, cherubim attend the throne chariot of God. Their presence on the ark signaled that this was not merely a container, but a throne, the earthly footstool of the invisible king. Inside the ark, Moses placed the 2 tablets of the testimony, the stone tablets inscribed with the 10 commandments. Later tradition records that a golden jar of manna and Aaron's rod that budded were also placed either inside or beside the ark, though the book of 1 Kings notes that by Solomon's time, only the tablets remained. The tablets were the covenant document, the treaty terms between God and Israel. Ancient Near Eastern treaties were typically deposited in temples at the feet of the gods who witnessed the agreement. The ark, then, served as both treaty repository and divine throne, a tangible representation of the covenant relationship. The completed ark resided in the innermost chamber of the tabernacle, the Holy of Holies, separated from the rest of the sanctuary by a heavy curtain. Only the high priest could enter this space, and only once per year on the Day of Atonement. Even then, elaborate purification rituals were required, and the high priest entered with blood from the sacrifice, which he sprinkled on the mercy seat. The book of Leviticus warns that entering improperly would result in death. Tell your brother Aaron not to come at just any time into the holy place inside the veil, before the mercy seat which is on the ark, lest he die, for I will appear in the cloud above the mercy seat. This was not arbitrary divine temperament. The theological framework presented in Leviticus and surrounding texts depicts holiness as a kind of spiritual reality incompatible with sin and impurity, not as a moral judgment, but as an ontological condition. The imagery often used is fire. Just as physical fire consumes flammable material not because it is angry but because of what fire is, divine holiness was understood to consume unholiness by its very nature. The elaborate ritual system, then, was not about appeasing an angry deity, but about creating conditions under which sinful humans could safely approach perfect holiness. The ark's power was first demonstrated during Israel's wilderness wanderings. Numbers chapter 10 describes the ark's role when the camp moved. Whenever the ark set out, Moses would say, "Rise up, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered, and let those who hate you flee before you." And when it rested, he would say, "Return, O Lord, to the 10,000 thousands of Israel." The ark did not simply travel with the people, it led them. A cloud covered the tabernacle when the ark was stationary, and when the cloud lifted, the people knew to break camp and follow. The ark, carried by the Levitical priests, went before the assembly, identifying the path through trackless wilderness. The first major demonstration of the ark's power in military context came at the Jordan River. After 40 years of wilderness wandering, Israel stood on the eastern bank of the Jordan, ready to enter Canaan. The book of Joshua records that the river was at flood stage, overflowing its banks. Not an ideal moment for a mass crossing with women, children, and livestock, but God instructed the priests carrying the ark to step into the water. The moment their feet touched the Jordan's edge, the water upstream stopped flowing and piled up in a heap, while the water downstream continued to flow away, leaving a dry riverbed. The priest stood in the middle of the dry Jordan bed, holding the ark while the entire nation crossed over. When the last person reached the western bank, and the priest carrying the ark ascended from the riverbed, the waters returned and the Jordan resumed its flood. This was not a natural phenomenon. The text emphasizes the timing. The water stopped precisely when priestly feet touched the river's edge and resumed when they departed. It deliberately echoes the crossing of the Red Sea a generation earlier, establishing continuity of divine power and presence. But there's an additional element. 12 stones were taken from the middle of the riverbed, where the priest stood and set up as a memorial at Gilgal. This memorial served as a teaching tool for future generations, a physical reminder that the God who brought Israel out of Egypt continued to act powerfully through his established presence among them, symbolized by the ark. The most famous demonstration of the ark's power came at Jericho. This was Israel's first military engagement in Canaan, and Jericho was no minor outpost. Archaeological excavations have revealed that Jericho was a fortified city with massive double walls, an outer wall approximately 6 feet thick and an inner wall 12 feet thick, separated by a gap of 15 feet. The walls stood on earthen ramparts rising about 35 feet above ground level. From a military perspective, Jericho was virtually impregnable to the siege technology available to Bronze Age armies. The strategy God commanded was unlike any military operation recorded in ancient Near Eastern warfare. The entire Israelite army was to march around the city once per day for 6 days. The Ark of the Covenant was to be carried by priests, preceded by 7 priests blowing ram's horn trumpets. No one was to speak. Only the sound of marching feet and ram's horns would be heard. On the 7th day, they were to circle the city 7 times, and on the 7th circuit, the priests would give a long blast on the trumpets. The people would shout, and the walls would collapse. Joshua chapter 6 records that events unfolded exactly as predicted. After 7 days and 7 circuits, the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they captured the city. Skeptics have proposed various naturalistic explanations: earthquake, structural instability, resonance frequency. But these explanations struggle with the timing. If an earthquake caused the collapse, why did it occur at the precise moment of the trumpet blast and shout? If the walls were structurally unsound, why didn't they collapse during the previous 6 days of marching vibrations? The biblical account presents this as a direct divine act, coordinated with human obedience and mediated through the presence of the Ark. Kathleen Kenyon's mid-20th century excavations at Jericho found evidence of destruction layers from various periods, though dating these layers precisely has proven controversial among archaeologists. Some scholars argue evidence exists for a violent destruction around the time period traditionally assigned to Joshua's conquest, while others place the relevant destruction layers centuries earlier or later. What remains undisputed is that Jericho's fortifications were indeed formidable, and that the city underwent multiple destructions throughout its long history. But the Ark's power was not only demonstrated in Israel's victories, it also brought devastating judgment when treated irreverently, even by Israelites. During the period of the Judges, the Ark was housed at Shiloh in the tabernacle. Israel was at war with the Philistines, Philistines. And after a significant defeat, the elders decided to bring the ark from Shiloh to the battlefield, believing its presence would guarantee victory. The sons of Eli the priest, Hophni and Phinehas, accompanied the ark to the front lines. 1 Samuel chapter 4 records that when the ark arrived in the Israelite camp, the soldiers raised such a shout that the ground shook. The Philistines heard the commotion and learned that the ark had arrived. Terror spread through the Philistine ranks. They knew the reputation of Israel's God, the stories of Egypt's plagues and the Red Sea crossing. They rallied each other. "Take courage and be men, O Philistines, lest you become slaves to the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Be men and fight." The battle was catastrophic for Israel. 30,000 foot soldiers were killed. Hophni and Phinehas died in the fighting, and the Ark of the Covenant was captured by the Philistines. When the news reached Eli, who was 98 years old, he fell backward from his seat, broke his neck, and died. His daughter-in-law, pregnant and near term, went into labor upon hearing the news, gave birth and died, but not before naming her son Ichabod. "The glory has departed," saying, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured." The capture of the ark should have represented ultimate victory for the Philistines. In ancient Near Eastern warfare, capturing an enemy's god meant demonstrating your god's superiority. The Philistines took the ark to Ashdod and placed it in the temple of their god Dagon as a trophy. The next morning, the statue of Dagon had fallen face down before the ark. They set Dagon upright. The following morning, Dagon had fallen again, and this time his head and hands were broken off, lying on the threshold. Then the plagues began. The people of Ashdod were struck with tumors. The Hebrew word suggests either bubonic swellings or hemorrhoids, both deeply painful and humiliating afflictions. The Philistines moved the ark to Gath. The same plague struck there. They moved it to Ekron. The people of Ekron protested violently, crying out that the ark would kill them all. The tumors spread throughout the Philistine territories. First, Samuel adds an unusual detail. A plague of mice or rats accompanied the tumors, which has led some scholars to suggest this may have been bubonic plague, as rats are the primary vector for plague transmission. After 7 months of suffering, the Philistine priests and diviners advised sending the ark back to Israel with a guilt offering, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden mice, representing the 5 Philistine city-states. They placed the ark on a new cart pulled by 2 milk cows that had never been yoked, cows whose calves were taken away from them. This was a test. Cows separated from their calves would naturally try to return to them, not wander into foreign territory. If the cows headed toward Israelite territory, it would confirm that Israel's God, not chance, had caused their suffering. The cows went straight to the Israelite town of Beth Shemesh, lowing as they went, never turning aside, their drivers following behind. The people of Beth Shemesh rejoiced to see the ark return. They offered sacrifices, but then some of the men looked into the ark. 1 Samuel chapter 6 records that God struck down 70 men of Beth Shemesh because they had looked into the ark. The text notes, "And the people mourned because the Lord had struck the people with a great blow. Then the men of Beth Shemesh said, 'Who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God? And to whom shall he go up away from us?'" This incident underscores a crucial theological principle in the ark narratives. Familiarity did not grant immunity. These were Israelites, not pagans. They knew the law. They knew the ark was not to be opened, not to be touched, not to be treated as a common object. Their violation brought immediate consequences, reinforcing that holiness cannot be approached casually, regardless of one's ethnic or religious identity. The message was clear. Respect for divine presence was not optional, and consequences consequences for irreverence were severe and immediate. The ark remained at Kiriath Jearim for 20 years in the house of Abinadab, whose son Eleazar was consecrated to guard it. During this time, Israel's political structure shifted from the tribal confederation under judges to a monarchy under King Saul. When David became king and established Jerusalem as his capital, one of his first acts was to bring the ark to Jerusalem. This transfer began well but ended in tragedy. David assembled 30,000 chosen men of Israel and went to Baalah of Judah to bring up the ark. They placed the ark on a new cart driven by Uzzah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab. David and all Israel celebrated before the ark with songs and instruments, lyres, harps, tambourines, castanets, and cymbals. At the threshing floor of Nacon, the oxen stumbled. Uzzah reached out his hand to steady the ark. 2 Samuel chapter 6 states, "And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error, and he died there beside the ark of God." David's response was complex. Anger, fear, and a halting of the transfer. David was afraid of the Lord that day, and he said, "How can the ark of the Lord come to me?" This incident has troubled readers for millennia. Uzzah's action appears instinctive, even protective. Why such a severe response? Several points merit consideration. First, the ark should never have been on a cart. The Levitical law specified it must be carried by poles on the shoulders of consecrated Levites. Using a cart, even a new one, was already a violation, copying Philistine practice rather than following divine instruction. Second, the poles were designed precisely to prevent situations requiring direct contact. Third, the assumption that human hands could or should steady the ark reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of what the ark represented. The one whose presence rested above the mercy seat did not need human assistance to maintain stability. The act, however well-intentioned, embodied the presumption that human wisdom could correct for divine vulnerability, an inversion of the proper relationship. David left the ark at the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite for 3 months. During that time, the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. When David heard this, he completed the transfer, this time doing it correctly. The Levites carried the ark by its poles. Sacrifices were offered every 6 paces, and David danced before the ark with all his might. The ark was installed in a tent David had prepared in Jerusalem, and regular worship was established around it. David desired to build a permanent temple to house the ark, reasoning that he lived in a palace of cedar, while the ark of God dwelt in a tent. God's response through the prophet Nathan was unexpected. God did not need a house. He had dwelt in a tent from the Exodus until now. Instead, God would establish David's house, his dynasty. David's son would build the temple. That son was Solomon. 1 Kings chapter 6 through 8 describe the construction of Solomon's temple in meticulous detail. The inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, was a perfect cube, 20 cubits in every direction, overlaid entirely with gold. 2 massive cherubim of olive wood overlaid with gold, each 10 cubits high with 10-cubit wingspans, were placed in the inner sanctuary. Their wings touched in the center of the room and reached to the walls on either side, creating a canopy beneath which the ark would rest. When the temple was completed, Solomon assembled all Israel to Jerusalem. The priests brought the ark from the tent David had erected and placed it beneath the wings of the cherubim in the Holy of Holies. 1 Kings chapter 8 records, "And when the priests came out of the holy place, a cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord." Solomon's prayer at the dedication acknowledged a profound theological paradox. But will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you. How much less this house that I have built? Yet God had chosen to localize his presence above the mercy seat between the cherubim as a place where prayers could be directed and divine response could be known. For nearly 4 centuries, the ark remained in Solomon's temple. It witnessed Israel's divided kingdom, the reigns of righteous and wicked kings, prophetic warnings, and temporary reforms. And then, silence. The biblical text never explicitly records the ark's destruction destruction or removal. 2 Kings chapters 24 and 25 describe Nebuchadnezzar's siege of Jerusalem in 586 BCE and the systematic looting of the temple. The text lists numerous items taken to Babylon: gold and silver vessels, bronze pillars, bronze sea, bronze stands, but the ark is never mentioned. When the temple was rebuilt after the exile, the returning exiles brought back many items that had been taken to Babylon. But again, no mention of the ark. The Second Temple's Holy of Holies, by all accounts, was empty. This silence has generated numerous theories. Some propose the ark was destroyed by the Babylonians, though it seems unlikely such a significant event would go unrecorded. Others suggest it was hidden before the Babylonian invasion. 2 Maccabees, a text preserved in some Christian traditions but not in the Hebrew Bible, claims the prophet Jeremiah hid the ark in a cave on Mount Nebo and that its location would remain unknown until God gathers his people together again and shows his mercy. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church claims the ark resides in the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum, Ethiopia. According to their tradition, Menelik I, son of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, brought the ark to Ethiopia in the 10th century BCE. A single guardian monk is appointed to watch over it for life, and no one else is permitted to view it. Photographs are forbidden. Western scholars remain skeptical, noting the lack of independent verification and the difficulty of reconciling this tradition with the biblical account of the ark's presence in Jerusalem for centuries after Solomon's death. Other theories place the ark in hidden chambers beneath the Temple Mount, either deliberately concealed before the Babylonian invasion or collapsed into underground caverns during the destruction. Temple Mount's political and religious sensitivity makes archaeological investigation impossible. Some propose the ark was taken to Egypt or hidden among the Dead Sea caves. The reality is that no credible archaeological or textual evidence definitively locates the ark. What can be stated with confidence is what the ark represented theologically. The mercy seat, where blood was sprinkled on the Day of Atonement, stood above the tablets of the law. This spatial arrangement embodied a crucial principle. Mercy covers law. Atonement is provided over judgment. The letter to the Hebrews in the New Testament develops this imagery extensively, arguing that Christ functions as both high priest and atoning sacrifice, that his blood provides permanent access to God's presence, and that the earthly Holy of Holies pointed forward to a greater reality. From this theological perspective, the ark's disappearance becomes significant in itself. The physical object served a purpose for a specific period in redemptive history. When that purpose was fulfilled, the symbol gave way to the reality it foreshadowed. The temple curtain that separated the Holy of Holies tore in two at Christ's crucifixion, not by human hands but from top to bottom, symbolizing that access to God's presence was no longer mediated through a physical location but through Christ himself. But this theological interpretation, accepted within Christian tradition, doesn't diminish the historical questions or the archaeological mystery. The ark existed. It functioned as described for centuries. It disappeared. Where it went remains unknown. What is known is that the ark's power, as recorded in biblical texts, was not magical or superstitious, but relational. It was powerful because of whose presence it represented, not because of any inherent properties in gold-covered wood. The instant deaths, the battlefield victories, the plagues on Israel's enemies, the blessings on those who honored it, all these flowed from the reality that the infinite God had chosen to localize his presence in proximity to a finite object. To approach that presence incorrectly was to cross a boundary between the holy and the common, with catastrophic consequences. The ark forces a confrontation with the nature of holiness. Modern sensibilities often struggle with the concept. We tend to flatten everything to a common level, resisting hierarchies of sacred and profane. But the ark narratives insist that such categories exist, that they matter, and that ignoring them is perilous. Whether one accepts these accounts as historical, theological, or symbolic. They present a consistent worldview in which divine holiness is not abstract but concrete, not tolerant but dangerous, not affirming but demanding. The Ark of the Covenant stands as ancient Israel's most tangible connection to the invisible God. Its construction followed precise divine instruction. Its power toppled cities and struck down those who approached it irreverently. Its disappearance remains one of history's great unsolved mysteries. What it represented, the possibility of divine presence among humanity, continues to resonate across millennia of religious thought. The mysteries of the Ark continue to inspire and challenge our faith. What do you believe happened to the Ark? Was it destroyed, hidden, or transformed in purpose when its symbolic role was complete? The Convergent Script exists to explore these profound intersections of faith, history, and evidence. Subscribe now to continue uncovering biblical truths and share your theories on the Ark's fate in the comments below.